All right, no formalities today. Let's just drop right into the absolute chaos of chapters 12 and 13. If you've been following along with the bizarre genesis of the Squashlight, you know things are, well, they've escalated. We've got a missing boy who's literally been transformed into a glowing vegetable, a totally reluctant coven of three village women just now discovering their powers, and frankly, a whole lot of supernatural bog gas. So let's break down exactly how all this collides in our explainer today. Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly does a cosmic journey end? Well, on a dining room table, of course. Our three women, Old Lady King, Carol Bell, and Miss Tasha, you know, the self-proclaimed spent hens, are basically being hurled back from a dream realm. They're crossing back into the mortal world through this wild transportation method that's totally outside of space and time. And let me tell you, their grand re-entry into reality, it is not graceful. They crash land directly on top of Old Lady King's dining room furniture. To safely deposit their life forces from, literal cosmic dust back into physical reality, the magic kind of takes a snapshot of their psyches to find a safe physical pose. And the results? Absolutely absurd. First off, Old Lady King appears facing right, just violently chopping the air. Then Carol Bell materializes right in the middle, inexplicably holding a massive ladle and trying to speak into it. And Tosha? She pops up facing left, her hands shaped like a tiny crossbow. They materialize screaming, covered head to toe in ash, completely disoriented. And the sheer weight of this bizarre, tangled, six-armed, six-legged mess, it instantly shatters the dining table into pieces, sending them all tumbling straight to the floor. Talk about a misunderstanding, because this sets up an absolutely incredible moment of dramatic irony. Inside the cottage, our three women look around and realize how utterly ridiculous they look. They're covered in soot, their hair is a wild mess, and the pure, unadulterated relief of surviving this whole ordeal makes them completely break down into this exhausted, hysterical laughter. But outside the cottage, the local constables have just arrived. And what do they hear? Definitely not relieved laughter. It's the dead of night, they're outside the herbalist's home, and they hear what they are absolutely convinced is wicked, witchy cackling. Which brings us to this rapid-fire, theatrical comedy of errors. The constables just burst through the door, waving their clubs around, literally terrified of these so-called witches. The first constable yells, "Hands up!" But the second one immediately panics and shouts, "No, they're witches, numbskull! Don't let them move their hands, they might cast a spell!" They are just bumbling all over each other, totally clueless about how to safely detain three middle-aged women covered in dust who are armed with a ladle. They finally settle on the incredibly awkward command of, "Just put your hands on your heads, ladies." Now, the crucial point here is the irony. As the constables are slapping manacles on these women, they accuse them of cackling and bring up the missing boy, young Wat Wagholter. And as they're being marched out, the women have this sudden, horrifying realization. First, the magical codex, the very thing that started this whole mess, they left it behind. And second, the unusually orange, fiercely glowing pumpkin, which is actually the transformed missing boy, is completely gone. The irony is just too much to handle. It's actually only after they are falsely arrested for witchery that the sheer absurdity of losing a glowing magical vegetable hits them. And that's when they actually start genuinely, uncontrollably cackling as they get marched off into the night. Section 2. Peter finds the pumpkin. A shift from slapstick to solemn magic. Let's just take a breath right here. Let the pacing reset for a second. Because the narrative in Chapter 13 takes a pretty hard turn. We're leaving the physical comedy of the reluctant coven's arrest and moving into something deeply emotional and honestly quite melancholic. Out in the dark, near the decimated bog, someone else has found our missing squash. And that someone is Ceepivis Peter. You probably know him by his royal title of honor, Peter Pumpkin Eater. But as the source details, Peter isn't some silly nursery rhyme caricature. He's a hardened ex-soldier for the crown, a security guard who's traveled the old world, and now he's really just looking for a quiet civilian life with his wife. But the bog explosions drew him out to the woods, and what he finds in that wrecked vine patch makes the hairs on his neck stand straight up. It's an unusually orange pumpkin, and it is furiously glowing. Peter knows magic when he sees it, and he knows for a fact he can't just leave a magically volatile object sitting near a village. Now, what's really interesting about this is how Peter deals with it. To figure out what to do with this glowing squash, he has to consult the fair folk, and they operate on some very strict rules. First, they won't outright lie, but they will absolutely twist the truth. Second, and this is crucial, a true name summons them. They cannot ignore the call of a mortal who speaks their true name. And finally, they're bound by a concept the source calls preternatural dibs. Basically, if a magical entity from another faction is involved in a mess, the Fae cannot interfere with that mortal chaos. Peter knows all this, and he also knows the true name of the one specific entity who can diagnose this glowing flora. That entity is Habitrot. She is a fairy godmother, usually responsible for caring for young maidens along the borderlands. But her connection to Peter is incredibly profound and honestly, really tragic. Peter marches right up to the magistrate's borderlands and calls out her true name. And he does this with a heavy heart. Why? Because centuries ago, Habitrot actually broke the ultimate boundary and fell into a deep, forbidden love with Peter. He's immortal, so he grew older and he's married now. But that ancient love they shared, it's still there. She is literally the only magical being in the entire world he trusts enough to diagnose this pumpkin. So when Habitrot appears, all shimmering and sparkles and chimes, she tries to deflect his attention at first, but then her eyes lock onto the pumpkin. She steps forward, very solemnly. First, she carefully inspects the ridges of the squash's rinds. Then she gives the little vestigial vine at the top a light pull. And finally, in this very intimate, magical gesture, she lays both of her palms and her forehead directly against the glowing vegetable. Right away, she senses witchcraft. But what's surprising is that she senses absolutely no malice in it. After communing with the flora, she suddenly bolts upright. She runs back to Peter and delivers this truly horrifying revelation. This pumpkin is a living soul. The sheer dramatic weight of this line just changes the whole game. It confirms our absolute worst fears. Young Wat Raghalter hasn't just been cursed or trapped in some illusion. His very consciousness, his living soul, has been literally transformed into the pulp and rind of this glowing vegetable. But remember those roles of the Fae we talked about? This is where they come back with devastating effect. Because of those laws of non-interference, that whole preternatural dibs thing, Habitrot literally cannot help the boy. She has to deliver this tragic verdict. She tells Peter, "You need not return it, but take it away from my borderlands with care. Set him upon the side of the road. I think someone else is looking for him." She recognizes that some other chaotic forces are at play here, forces she is strictly forbidden to touch. So she commands Peter to just walk away and leave the boy, as a pumpkin, on the side of a road. This brings the chapter to an incredibly poignant close. They both have to acknowledge the total unfairness of it all, not just for the trapped boy, but regarding their own forbidden love. Habitrot tells Peter to grow old and be happy, and then she just fades away into sparkles and chimes, forever bound by her immortal Fae duty. It's heartbreaking. Peter wipes his tears, and the source beautifully notes that he encases her memory in a little pumpkin shell deep within his heart. He ends his hunting trip right there, returning to his mortal wife and his civilian life. So Peter follows her instructions to the letter. He leaves the glowing vegetable safely on the side of the dirt road, physically stepping away from the magic forever. Think about where we're at now. The coven is locked up in manacles, Peter is gone, and Wat Raghalter, a literal living boy trapped inside a vegetable, is just sitting alone, glowing furiously in the chill night air. It's literally all he can do. Which leaves us with one massive question. Who on earth will find the squashlight next? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I absolutely cannot wait to dive into what happens next with you.